Drivers, start your engine!
Radio Network, Drafting the Circus program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about racing. Joining me in the studio, I have Richard Youden and Luis Torres. Guys, what's happening?
Hey, how's it going? It's all good. It's all good.
Oh, man, a lot to discuss about.
Yep. Yeah, Louise is very heated over a baseball game, but we'll try to save that for our baseball podcast on another day. But pretty big weekend in racing. We had an elimination round there at the Roval in Charlotte and Formula One out in Japan, where we have decided the championship for good, we think, for this year. So where do you guys want to start? You want to start in Charlotte or do you want to start in Japan?
I'm going to start in Charlotte. Go on.
Let's start in Charlotte. And Richard, I know you spent your weekend there at the track.
I did, yeah.
Yep. So I've not been there to race on the Roval, but from what you were telling me, it sounds like you had a good time. And you were telling me that where it looks rather flat on television, there's actually really a good amount of elevation change in there. And you had a chance to drive the track, which I find to be exciting. So yeah. Good weekend overall. Lots of
very much so.
Playoff drama. We had guys in and out and back in and back out towards the end there. At the end of the day, it was Christopher Bell who made just the right call to grab some fresh tires when a couple guys ahead of him didn't, and snuck out the win, won his way out of the playoffs, pushing Austin Cindric and Kyle Larson out.
Yeah, no, it was a pretty eventful. Well, the last 5 or 10 laps were pretty eventful. The previous 90 or however many it was were pretty tough going, unfortunately. But no, you're right. It was an eventful weekend, and we've knocked it down to a top 8. I was very lucky there. I got an opportunity to be involved in the driver parade and the driver introductions, driving one of the new Toyota Tundra trucks. Beautiful vehicle there around the track with we got on a bit of a random draw. We got Bubba Wallace and Martin Truex Jr. as the 2 drivers that I was chaperoning around the track pre-race, but that was a great opportunity and great fun to do that. Very, very lucky to do. And you think at the Roval, the infield of the Roval is going to be flat as the proverbial pancake, but no, it has quite a nice elevation change to it in there. The exit of turn 1, that little left-hander, as it comes back onto the onto the infield, there's a big drop off there. A lot of undulation there, pretty aggressive. And then there was I think it's turn 5 into turn 6. Turn 5, the right-hander, a blind right-hander. Over a crest down into turn 5 into 6 was that was pretty wow. Somebody has a moment on the exit and straddles the circuit there. You don't have much chance to avoid them. So very very impressed with the amount of elevation they've managed to create on the infield. But on the whole, pretty good crowd, really supportive of the drivers. It was really good to see. Wasn't the biggest crowd in the world, I don't think. It'd been nice to see a few more people, but on the whole, no, it was good. And unfortunately, it was the first 2 stages were pretty processional, and then we got into the 3rd stage, and that's when all hell broke loose as I was driving home because we left early. But that's another story.
It's kind of odd for it to go that long, caution free, the first whole 2 stages, because usually we have some especially on the road courses in NASCAR race, we've got some bumping and banging and guys getting into one another. But
I think it was partly that everybody knew what they needed to do from a points perspective.
Yes.
So there was very, very little risk taking there. Obviously, guys like Joey, go out there, win the first stage, get the points, bank those. He's good. Which was because he was fast in that first stage when he stayed out. Everybody else short pitted before the end of the first stage caution. But yeah, I mean, he had a quick car. I don't know where he finished, but for a long period of that second stage, he was running around about 20th to 25th, which certainly wasn't his pace, should we say? But yeah, no, good race on the whole, and a few nice strategy calls there with short pitting and the like. But yeah, it all got a little bit messy at the end there. You look like Chase Elliott's locked in for the win. As he tends to do on these road courses at times. Tyler Reddick's up there giving a good race again. And AJ as well, AJ Allmendinger won the Xfinity race on Saturday. Now he's now won 4 Xfinity races in a row at the Roval, which is pretty impressive stat there for AJ Allmendinger. But it was good, and it was some good racing, and you think that, and then of course you get the debris caution for that piece of signage that was on on the apex of turn 5 there, and then you have a few more guys coming in contact with each other. It's all starting to get a little bit clumsy, and then a couple of tire strategies there, a couple of tire calls, and next thing Christopher Bell's there out in the lead, and he had to go for that Hail Mary, and he it was a walk-off victory. And if you're going to do it properly. And talking to some of the Toyota and TRD executives the last couple of days, a lot of them had already left the track as well and had to do a quick U-turn to get back to the victory celebrations. But it's all good fun.
Yeah. I mean, Bell was in a situation where his only route into the next round of the playoffs at that point was to win that race. It's either win or eliminate. He didn't have the points to be above the cut line. So, but let's talk about who are the remaining 8 drivers. So starting at the top, we've got Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, Ross Chastain, Christopher Bell, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, Denny Hamlin, and Chase Briscoe are the round of 8. Eliminated in this round, Kyle Larson, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, and then Alex Bowman, who did not participate after suffering concussion injuries recently. So that's where we're at. Louise, we were talking the other day. It still doesn't look like we have a clear-cut favorite for this championship yet, although Chase Elliott seems to remain at or near top of the standings week in, week out.
Yeah, at this point, I don't think there's a true definitive favorite. I know I mentioned Logano's been the more consistent. At this point,
has he though? I mean, post Darlington, I think he's had like 1 top 10 or something.
Yeah, and then
he's struggled a little bit these last few weeks.
Yeah, and then we could say the same thing about Bell as well until he got that win. So at this moment, it's really I came to the point as he said nobody's really standing out. With Larson out of the picture and the driver's side of things, the onus is a completely different story that we'll discuss some other time. But there's none. If we see the Christopher Bell from the opening round and this one coming up in the round of 8, maybe you could make a decent case for him. But right now, I don't have a clear-cut favorite anymore for the Cup title.
If you look at form, I think Christopher Bell, he's had 4 top 10s, or 4 top 5s in the 6 playoff races. So he's probably the form guy, if you like. Chase has had 2, Logano's had 1 after Darlington. So I think there's a lot of consistency going on there, and I think probably Bell's been the most consistent, even though he had a bad Texas race, so he had to win at Charlotte. So that sort of skewed his numbers a little bit. But there's nobody that you look is constantly up there on pace, in every race. Never mind their actual finishing positions.
No, and the thing with Bell, just the momentum of pulling that win out when he needed to. that is such a boost for the team. That gives them such a boost of confidence and a really good feeling going into the next round there. So you got to watch out for Bell because there's something to be said for momentum and when you feel like everything is kind of going your way, that team's got to feel tremendous coming out of this weekend, having pulled that off. So yeah, those guys are going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, it's gonna be like I said. Let's see which ones will show up. We're gonna see the round of 16 bell or round of 12 bell prior to the Roval. And if it's the round of 16 bell, I think you could steal this one. To be honest with you.
I mean, is he really stealing it if nobody's running away with it? Think about it. You know
I
what
think
I mean?
like
I think it's anybody's for the taking right now, or any of those 8 guys.
And the reason
for
why
sure.
I say steal because I don't think anybody expected Bell to be this good in the playoffs. I get it. Your playoffs is where you want to shine the most, but when you look at the regular season, aside from the Loudon win, which has he stood out? Not really.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the guys that are out of this thing, you know what I mean, like Truex, who's didn't even make it, didn't make the playoffs, but he's been a perennial Final Four guy. Harvick eliminated. We've got Kyle Larson now eliminated. Kyle Busch is eliminated. You got a lot of your top guys are now not fighting for this thing. So it really opens it up for somebody like a Christopher Bell or even dare I say, a Ross Chastain to become a Cup champion.
Yeah, and it would be a long time coming. And when you really think about it, if Bell were to pull it off and Larson winning the year before, you could say that the two competitive racers on dirt were able to pull it off in the top level of asphalt racing.
Indeed, yep. So, all right. So we had an Xfinity race there as well, which we already mentioned that was Allmendinger again,
Yep.
who's on a road course you can never count AJ out. The guy is just so head and shoulders above most of the other guys out there on the road courses there, and especially when he's against the Xfinity field. But he was really good in the Cup field as well. There, he almost pulled that win off too. He was right up there near the front.
He led a number of laps, didn't he, in the College Cup car?
Absolutely, yeah. So then, of course, we had some of our IndyCar was making a big deal about some part-time and full-time IndyCar drivers running in the race. Here we had in both the Xfinity and the Cup race. I want to say Marco Andretti and Sage Karam were in the Xfinity race. I mean, neither set the world on fire. I think Marco finished next to last.
Yeah, taken out early.
Yeah, he DNF'd, and then I want to say Sage had more of a decent day. Might have come home like 18th or 20th. I don't have it right in front of me. And then the other one was I think Connor Daly started in the Cup race, and he finished like 34th or something.
Yeah, his day
nothing.
Well.
Yeah, nothing to write home about for those guys, but good experience them. And then we had, our favorite Russian guy from Formula One running NASCAR, Daniel Kvyat, ran both races. Did a little better in the Xfinity than he did in the Cup race, but again, good experience for a guy who wants to try to get into NASCAR full time. And being that he's a Russian driver, he may be, give Bubba Wallace a break from the hate. And then people start hating on the Russian guy.
I still don't know about that yet. Time will tell.
As long as I've been on this planet, we've been fighting the Russians over something. So, I'll tell you,
Kvyat's got enough money back behind him to make a run at it next year.
Yeah, but as a driver, Kvyat's a guy I like. I do. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know. Talking to a lot of the engineers that've been working with him and seeing some of the data that's come off him, he's quick. He gets the car. He understands it. I mean, the Xfinity race that he ran at the Roval last weekend was the first time in his racing career he's driven a H-pattern gearbox, which is pretty incredible. When you put that into context. But it's the first time he's driven a box with a H-pattern in there. So,
even in a road car or anything, or just racing?
In a race car.
Okay, all right. I was going to say that would be highly unusual if you never had driven one at all. But yeah. But you figure a lot of the single seaters he's running, a lot of those guys have the sequential boxes. Yeah, but he did well for his part. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
No. Very well. I mean, I think his pace probably belied his actual result. I think he had a little bit more to it than what he showed in terms of overall pace.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yep. Yeah, I think he looked better than Kimmy did when Kimmy was doing. Where was Kimmy running? Road America
No,
or
Watkins Glen.
Watkins Glen? Yeah, yeah. So all right, so we're off to Vegas next. So we've got the first of the round of 8 non-elimination round, but still important for these guys near the bottom of the 8 to try to maybe notch a win, and so they can just focus on the final 4. So, I mean, Louise, who do you like for Vegas?
I think, well, one of the catalysts is likely gone who won the spring race, so that's Alex Bowman. But I feel like you're going to go through the Gibbs cars at Vegas, to be honest. And I feel like this could be a Denny Hamlin kind of a day where he punches his ticket to the championship 4. And and because something tells me in a way, and I've seen some people feeling that way a tiny bit. This if things go well in this round, if he plays the cards right, in all intents and purposes, Hamlin could be a dark horse to actually win the darn thing. And I feel like it starts at Vegas.
I don't even know that I would classify Hamlin as a dark horse. I'd say he's got a good as chance as anybody else. And again, here's a guy who is well overdue for a championship. You know, he's won all the majors. He won, multiple times. Multiple Daytona 500 winner. And here's a guy who's just won a ton of races. Just got the whole Mark Martin thing going on. Never did nail down a championship, or the whole Elio Castro Neves syndrome. But this certainly could be his year. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but
the
we
only
say
reason
that.
why I say
We say that
dark horse.
about Denny every year.
Yeah, the only reason why I say dark horse is because you still have a couple drivers still in the mix. Even the ones that are out that could probably go out there and swing. Like I mentioned, Kyle Larson. For all we know, he could take this as motivation and rack up some wins. I mean, Tyler Reddick did it at Texas, albeit there were some factors into that. But Reddick had a strong car at Texas the both times they ran All-Star Open and the race itself this past month. So I feel like I still think some non-playoff drivers are going to be favorable. But in terms of those who are still in the hunt, I feel like Hamlin has a good chance at Vegas.
Yeah. So I would tend to agree with you there. So as far as Vegas, yeah, I think you're right. It's gonna be one of the Gibbs cars. But, I almost want to say Bell goes back to back, and just continues that momentum. But you're also looking at Truex, who's still sitting winless, and he's itching at least to notch a win this year. So yeah, but I'll stick with Bell though. Say Bell goes back to back, and goes right on to the final 4, and then see how we go from there. So, all right, and Richard, you'll abstain from picking, I'm sure,
Yep.
right? All right, so let's talk about some of the off track news. So the big hot story is that 23XI will be announcing within the next couple of days that they're going to go ahead and put Riddick in that car. Kurt Busch will likely be retiring. That'll put Ty Gibbs most likely on the full-time Gibbs team in place of Kyle Busch. So that frees up Richard Childress from trying to figure out something to do with Reddick for a year, because he said he had him contracted to drive. So if he gets 23XI buys him out of that contract, I mean, it gets him where he needs to go. That's his destination in 2024 anyway. Go ahead and start that relationship there. Kurt Busch, they say he wants to do another race. We'll just have to see how that plays out. But even if he doesn't race again, Kurt's had a wonderful career, and I hate to see anybody go out like this when they're not necessarily going out on their own terms. But it's probably the best for him and his health and his family.
For sure, it'll be beneficial for Kurt in the long run, because I feel like he's still got some stuff to contribute outside of him behind the wheel. I mean, from all intents and purposes, I've heard good things about him in the commentary side of things in truck series when he's not talking about cookies, Bristol dirt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of, a lot of former drivers out there who work in some capacity or another, as a spotter or as a driver's coach or as a strategy coach. Yeah. There's plenty of opportunity for him to stay within the sport, just not behind the wheel. And again, as you mentioned, the plenty of guys have gone into the broadcasting, and there's also, he could buy into a team at some point in time and become an owner. So there's a lot of things he could do to stay in the sport that won't risk his health as much as getting back in the car. So, because I
think being a team owner is pretty bad for your health at times.
Probably just in a different way. But I always, whenever we see these sort of things, I always go back to Neil Bonnet, who, he died back in the 90s, but he had a couple of really hard hits, and his doctors told him another really hard hit like that, and it could kill you, right? But he could not resist the temptation to stay out of the car. And here's a guy who had a pretty good career. He was working in broadcasting. He had his own television show that would come on every Sunday morning on the TNT network. And it was called Winners with Neil Bonnet. And he would interview, every week he would feature a different driver and just have a good old conversation sitting in his backyard. And he used to love watching that show. But it always just, when I think about the fact that his doctors warned him and he still got back in the car, and exactly what they said would happen happened. So that's, I always think about that when people think about how tough it is to walk away from the sport. Look, it's even tougher if you're gone from this planet,
Yeah. Look, there's stories out there that, Dale Jarrett, Rusty Wallace has had a hard time adapting into retirement life. Like this said, there's a piece out there that I recall that Rusty Wallace, when he left, he felt like he left a little too early because he basically left. He left at having probably one of his better seasons of the 2000s. He hadn't had like a superb season in quite some time. Yeah, he didn't win in his final year, but he was strongly consistent. And all that stuff. But I think he realized, one of the few that realized over time that maybe retirement was okay. It just took him a minute to acclimate. And there's a Mark Martin that took a couple of times, and then when he finally called it for good, he stuck to it, and he just wants nothing to do with racing in terms of being behind the wheel again. It doesn't matter if it's SRX or vice versa. He's content with where he is right now.
Yeah, you got a number of guys that like Gordon Johncock. He won't even talk about racing with you. You know what I mean? He'll talk about lumber all day long if you get him going on that subject, because that's what he does now. So
unless you're Steve Schnugg. Yeah. Unless you're Steve Schnugg, otherwise, this is true.
Exactly, yeah. So, and then you got somebody was talking about Sam Hornish Jr. the other day, right? And it's all because Sam is actually not that old. Yeah, I think he's only maybe 43 at this point. He's kind of been out of the game a couple of years, but people say, "Well, I wish Sam was still racing." I'm like, here's a guy who made a good amount of money in racing and was smart enough to invest it wisely enough that he really doesn't have to work, and he's got enough money to be comfortable, right? So, and he's perfectly content being a full-time dad to his daughters, and a family man. And he does things like he substitute teaches. He helps build sets for plays at the high school and stuff where his kids go to school. So, and here's a man who is just happy with that life and doesn't have that itch to get in the race car all the time. I mean, occasionally he does, every now and again, jumping in an Xfinity car, but it's more often the exception rather than the rule. These guys that say they're going to retire, and then it's like Kiss, right? Kiss had their first farewell tour in
Flair.
2000, right? So, Ric Flair. Yeah, so
he had his farewell tour this year, but he still wants to do it, even though he shouldn't, because he could probably end up like Randy the Ram in the movie Wrestler.
Yeah. How old is Ric Flair this day and age?
73, 74.
I was going to say, yeah, he's got to be a little old to be throwing his body around the wrestling ring. I'll say that.
Yeah,
But anyway, we'll save that for our wrestling podcast.
But the more, yeah, I know. The moral story is, it is. Some drivers have a hard time adapting. Sometimes you don't have a choice, and then ultimately you'll realize that it's for the best. And I think in this case, it might be for Kurt. What will be a shame though is we probably won't have him do versatile types of racing, because when he signed when he renewed his contract in 2019 with Ganassi before he went to 23XI, there was that spark that maybe he'll run Indy. Obviously, that was 2019, before the pandemic and before everything that's went down since then. It was possible. I feel like this retirement, we'll probably never get to see him run different types of disciplines. Maybe a one-off or two, but I think competitively, like where he is right now, I feel like we won't. It was just a shame, because it felt like Kurt was one of the very few that did it all in North America competition.
Yes, yeah, but again, I believe Kurt still has a lot he can contribute to the sport in the future, even if he's not behind the wheel. So, but we wish Kurt well, and that announcement is forthcoming, and we don't know all the details of it yet until they come out and tell us the details. We don't know if he's going to do a farewell race or what, but again, that's a guy that we've enjoyed watching, race over the years. So, anyway. So let's move on and talk about the Formula One, where we were in Japan, where we generally expect rain, and we got it. Got a very, very wet track. At the end of the day, it was Verstappen winning the race, and there was some confusion over how the points were awarded, because the race did not go the full distance. It went about 52% of the scheduled laps, right? Which, under the FIA's new rule that they came up with after Spa last year, was that they would be, a different. The points will be weighted. If you're less than 25%, you're getting this. Less than 50%, less than 75%, and then anything less than 75% or more would get you to full points. But they ran less than 75, so people were feeling Verstappen should have gotten 19 points and still been one shy of the championship. But the FIA clarified the rule. If I understand it correctly, the weighted points only apply to races that are stopped and not able to be resumed. Now, the Japanese Grand Prix ended up being a timed race, so it went its full time, if not its full distance. Now, Richard, did I get that right?
Oh, sure, I think so.
Yeah.
It's a timed race for the second straight Grand Prix in a row, and I think it's barely went over 50% race distance in terms of laps. Correct.
But in terms of time, it went its allotted time, so they awarded full points. But if Max didn't clinch it this week, he'd have clinched it next week. Come on, you know what I mean? So, but but good job to Max Verstappen and the Red Bull team this year. There are no question marks or asterisks on this champion or not. He was
they've spent their money wisely.
That's
for 2021, which let's just say this Grand Prix felt really weird and awkward in terms of the legality and the technical rules with this race.
Sure, yeah, but and as far as just performance behind the wheel, budget caps aside, there's no, the last one was tainted a little bit by officiating and whether or not they should have, and that was all last year. But so two-time champion now, and it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day. That more often than not, when a guy becomes a champion, they win multiple championships, right? There's only been a couple of really one-time champions of recent vintage, one being Rosberg, who retired immediately after winning the championship, and the other two would be Kimi, and then I guess Button. Well, Button more recently than Mansell. Yeah, sure. Mansell, another guy, walked away from the sport immediately after winning it. But it used to be if you the first guy to win 3 was Jack Brabham, right? No, the first guy to win 3 was Fangio, but he won 5. Yeah, I was thinking more if Fangio was a totally different vintage and era, there was this class of the field right there for 4 years running, unlike Hamilton or Schumacher in the current era. But yeah, it seems we have a trend towards more multiple championships. You think about some of the recent ones, you know what I mean? You got Schumacher, Vettel with four consecutive, which is pretty impressive. And then Hamilton with he's got the total of 7, but he's got 4 consecutive, doesn't he? Of
17 through 20.
Yep, that's 4 consecutive. Yeah, so that's a heck of a feat. It used to be Jackie Stewart used to say the hardest thing to do was repeat as champion. Because then his championships were all separated by a year. He won like every other year through the late 60s and mid 70s. But yeah, so I mean, it's just a sign of the how we kind of build dynasties with teams. If you look at Mercedes was dominant, but I could see Red Bull being dominant all the way through till the rules change in 2026. Unless this budget cap thing really hurts them. So, but Richard, what were your impressions of the race itself? The little bit of it we did get.
The bits that we did get to see, yeah. I mean, I think firstly, Pirelli and the teams and the FIA need to sit down and see what they can do with these wet weather tires. There was times, when it did rain very heavily in Japan, of course, and that the race should have been, suspended as it was. But then, there's other times where it didn't appear to be raining that hard, and you've got these wet weather tires, and it's just kicking up so much spray that the visibility is very bad, and it was almost undrivable. So, but again, it's a vicious circle. You throw up a lot of spray, you can't see what's going on. You throw up spray, which means the track's, got better grip, but the people behind can't see. Or you don't throw up spray, you got less grip, but people can see. It's a very difficult balance. But, you remember going, back not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, if you had a wet race, it was absolute carnage. There was people throwing cars off left, right, and centre. Whereas we've just seen 2 wet races are arguably 2 of the most demanding tracks on the calendar from a driver's perspective in Singapore and Suzuka. And I mean, Sainz crashed out. He had a couple of guys in Singapore that got a little bit clumsy and clipped a wall, but nothing crazy. So these cars are very, 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 very drivable in the rain. And I'd almost like to see them less drivable in the rain if it means there's less spray, which means it's safer to race out there. But yeah, it was difficult. I mean, obviously, the safety concerns, in any of those situations. And unfortunately, there was marked similarities between this race and the race we saw. I think it was back in 2015 when Jules Bianchi had his crash, which ultimately claimed his life 6 months later. And goodness me, we saw a very, very similar set of circumstances where Gasly ended up going past the tractor that was on the track at almost full racing speed, which was despite there being a safety car on the track. So you could argue that, but again, almost exactly the same set of circumstances. When Bianchi had his accident, he was trying to catch up with the safety car and lost control and hit the tractor, which was actually off the track, but in a gravel trap on that day in the Dunlop curve. Whereas Sainz had his accident between the hairpin and the spoon curve, and the tractor was actually on track, and because all of the rest of the field had passed behind the safety car, so we're doing a reasonably sensible pace, and Gasly was coming up at a far faster rate, and goodness me, that there was some flashbacks there. Now Gasly did get penalised or reprimanded for going too fast behind the safety car, which I think there needs to be better communication from the stewards and the officials to say, look, there are guys out there on track, don't go fast. Almost make it so that you have to go virtual safety car speed under a full safety car. I don't know, but they certainly need to look at something too.
It does seem odd that he's running out there. They said the penalty report said he was exceeding as much as 220 kilometers an hour. Under the safety car in the wet. I'm like, okay, It doesn't seem, number one, really smart, so. But so I mean, well-deserved penalty there. But yeah.
But as for the actual race, I mean, it was just Verstappen in a league of his own, really. The car got switched on. He managed his tyres better than Leclerc did, and just drove off to a second consecutive world championship, which I think, fully deserved. There's been races this year. The first half of the season, we were hoping that Leclerc would give him a run for his money, and at times he appeared to do that. But there was just too many mistakes from a combination of the Ferrari team and Leclerc himself to really mount a serious long-term challenge. And Red Bull just didn't make those mistakes. And obviously, we still do have this cost cap issue lingering in the background, and it's going to be a very interesting situation to see where we go forward from here. And there's a lot of pressure on the FIA to get this call right. Whether they do or not, who knows? It's going to be an interesting one to see what they come up with their findings on that.
Yeah, I like how Red Bull's press release said their minimal amount of overspend. Okay.
It's an overspend,
yeah, it's still an overspend. Yeah, minimal amount for Formula One team is more money than you and I will ever see in our lifetime. So
yeah, you tell that to the IRS auditor when you get audited for your taxes. Where's a minimal issue on my tax form? It's okay, isn't it? No.
Yeah, they'll come out. They'll come after you over $500.
Yeah,
IRS. Yeah. So yeah, and you have to see how it plays out with because this is again this budget cap we're looking at is for last season, which is come and gone and in the history books. But you got to wonder.
You don't know how the manager. Obviously there was a lot of because this year 2022 was these new set of regulations with the ground effect cars. Obviously, a lot of work on developing these cars would have been spent in 2021. So I think it does affect this year as well. And it probably affects next year and the year after as well with, not every single part of these cars is redesigned for next, every year. There are at times a number of carryover parts, especially when you have a reasonably consistent set of regulations. And, the design of a new car doesn't start on the 1st of January of the year it's in competition. It probably starts March, April time of the previous year. So, this 2022 car will have been into consideration during this period of financial irregularity. So, there's a lot. The FIA must be thinking, you've got to be joking. Of all the people to do this, and they've got to set a precedent here. There is no point in having a cost cap if you do not adhere to it. Pure and simple. If you allow teams to break the cost cap without really being a detrimental penalty to their well-being, then there's no point in doing it. If at the end of the day, a company like Red Bull has more money than you can shake a stick at. So if you turn around and said, okay, well, you've overspent by 3 million, we're going to fine you 10 million, then you'll be like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's fair. Cool. I'll overspend by 3 million next year, and I'll just give you the 10 million. Shall I run it now? Shall I post date it for next year? Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
This one out of the way.
It's got to find a way to exploit it.
Yeah.
There got to be some points involved. To be honest with you.
Yeah, but the thing is that these audits don't take place till after the season is over, and I'm not a fan of redistributing points after a season is over and done, right?
No, so I think you do.
But to your point, yeah, I mean, you've talked about taking away test days or practice sessions and those sort of things, which actually, that's pretty reasonable. That can, that can hurt the team a bit and not, make it such an easy penalty to just write a check to get out of.
I think that it would be reasonable to say Red Bull starts the 2023 season on minus 100 points. And the drivers both start on minus 25 or whatever. At the end of the day, they'll still be in the top 1 or 2 in the championship, but it could be that overspend does cost them the world championship.
It'll take them a while.
That'll be detrimental to the well-being of the team going forward. So if you have an overspend 1 year, then 2 years later you will pay the price for it. And that's a risk that the teams have got to take. You know, it's like some of these. It's like some of these basketball games where they deliberately give away fouls to stop the opposition scoring 3-pointers. You know, it's you got to try and avoid that situation of them manipulating the results here a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done, but what's the right answer? Again, like you say, the FIA has to tread carefully, because at the end of the day, what they want is the teams to adhere to the rules of their own volition, rather than trying to find a way out of it.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen them done it before, where they strip or exclude points. I mean, in some ways, like the former Racing Point, where pretty much it's the same team but different administrative, they pretty much whitewash all their points away. Albeit that's a different circumstance, but at the same time, they've done it before, and they just do it in a more harsher way than in previous years with Tyrrell or McLaren. With what was Tyrrell Turbo related, where they got stripped from the World Championship?
Oh, they got banned for a couple of races there, didn't they?
Yeah, and then there's obviously Spygate. I feel like this one should be on par as punishable in some extent. But I do agree with the idea, like maybe not let him test or practice for a good number of Grand Prix. But I feel like a points deduction is the best thing they could do as well in this scenario, because you surpass it. But the question remains, what about Aston Martin? I feel like they should get a light penalty for it too.
Well, sure, yeah, because they're also guilty of going over the cost cap, from what I understand. So,
Aston Martin apparently was a filing irregularity.
Okay.
Rather than actually, they were under the budget, but they didn't file the papers in the appropriate manner. As Williams didn't either. Now, we all knew about that in the start of the year when Williams openly admitted that they'd made a mistake. So they haven't been issued the certificate of compliance yet. But I think for the Williams, they've paid their fine, and that's just a matter of course.
Yeah,
they were upfront with it. They said, "Oops."
Yeah, I think a fine for them would be good. At points in that regard, you can toy it, but very minimal at best if you want to, because they're at fault. But if it's just a filing thing, then a fine will do.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I'm not a fan of going back and changing results from the previous year. You see this in like NCAA sports sometimes, where a team has some sort of another scandal, like they had in Louisville a couple of years, and then they have to vacate the championship. Well, they still won the damn thing, right?
Yeah.
They don't give that championship to the team that lost the game. It just vacate the championship, which I mean, it just looks hollow in the record books here, when everybody will say, "Oh yeah, well, Louisville won the game." It just they had to give the trophy back or whatever,
Yeah, we've seen it with USC football, and even Reggie Bush, to the point that he had to give up his Heisman.
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult as well, because you say that, the driver shouldn't be penalised for the team's oversight, but at the end of the day, the driver's the one driving the damn car, and he's the one that's benefiting from them overspending and developing a car. It's not like they went and spent the money on flowers. They spent it on developing a Formula One car that Max Verstappen used to win a world championship. And Hamilton is right. A lot of the other teams are right when they say, well, if we'd spent another $5 million, we could have been closer to Mercedes or to Red Bull. Hamilton may have won that championship, if they'd spent that extra $5 million. So it certainly does leave a very, very bitter taste in the mouth.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, again, no easy answer, but we'll just have to see how the FIA moves forward with that. So, all right, well, we got a couple of minutes left. So, I mean, what else? What other topics we have hanging out there?
All
right, Cole Custer, go ahead. Yeah, he got some sort of a penalty, right?
Yeah, and here's what the problem was. With Cole Custer is that they found evidence in his radio that the crew members would tell Custer that he had a flat tire and to back it down. Lo and behold, he backed it down right in front of where Austin Dillon is, and that really slowed Custer and Dillon down to the point that Chase Briscoe, that Scott Miller said at that point he was already in, so it didn't really necessarily affect the final cutoff position. Went by the chicane, no problem. But they found enough evidence that Cole Custer was not running at 100%. He manipulated the result that kind of propelled Briscoe to make the playoffs over Kyle Larson. And Mike Shiplett is indefinitely suspended, $100,000 fine, 50 driver owner points for Custer. Not that it matters for Custer anyway, since he's one of the bottom tier drivers of the full-time category. But it's very demoralizing, and also proves the point that time and time again, it's like the rule is there. You got to compete at 100%. If you don't compete at 100%, you will be punished.
What?
So are we saying he didn't have a flat tire?
Correct.
No.
Okay. All right.
They found evidence.
I want to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember who was that driver back in the about 2013-14 that had the itchy elbow or whatever?
Clint Boyer.
Yeah. Was with MWR? Yeah,
Spingate, where they penalized everybody, including Brian Vickers, who wasn't even competing for cup points.
Yeah, I think Michael Waltrip was setting records for penalties back when he was running the team.
Yeah, two of them.
Because he had the one with the fuel, right?
Yep, the jet fuel.
And then the spin gate, yeah. So yeah, it's good thing he's what does he do now? Run a brewery, right?
Yeah, brewery, calls races on Fox in the Truck Series. So I think he's doing okay. But yeah, it was a weird time period. But yeah, it's just this stuff you just cannot do. And in the brief presser, Scott Miller also brought up that the idea of suspending Custer was tossed around, but they wanted to stick to a precedent where we're not going to just suspend a driver if Custer didn't, like, in lamest terms, didn't cause harm to the competition, like taking somebody out on purpose where it could have hurt drivers like a Kyle Busch, Ron Hornaday ordeal. So they were open to the idea, but they didn't find anything to kind of like saw as harmful where somebody got hurt or somebody got it in somebody else's mess that they shouldn't have been. So they just stick to the suspension for Shiplett, and SHR are planning to appeal the decision. But the rule stands as expected, and NASCAR mentioned that whatever penalties the customer may face, it was not going to change the round of 8 at all.
So okay, let me ask you this now, okay?
Yes.
Did Custer know his tire wasn't flat? You said the crew chief told him his tire was flat. He should slow down.
Radio communication said like a flat tire. Told Custer flat tire may have a flat tire and to slow it down. And as soon as they kind of gave the relay the message to slow it down, Dylan was behind him, and boom, Briscoe flew out of nowhere to get by.
Ah, okay. All right. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around if Cole Custer, I mean, if they were selling him a load of shit, telling him that the tire was flat when it wasn't, or if he was kind of really in on the whole thing and knew what he was doing. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's more or less because Briscoe was behind it, gave him more position to assure him in the playoffs. Similar,
right, yeah.
Sort of Spingate, but not Spingate, where there's like multiple parts, just only the 41 directly in on it to help the 14. And I'm sure we'll know more, if at all, during probably the bullpens at Las Vegas when the guys like Bob tweets about it or posts on Twitter.
Oh, sure, yeah. Somebody will have an answer to that. So, all right. So, Richard, you got anything else?
I don't think so. No, I think we're looking pretty quiet going forward.
Pretty quiet. Where are we off next?
A lot of season starting to wrap up.
Yeah, where are we off next to in Formula One?
We are off to Austin.
I was going to say, I know that's got to be coming up. So we got a week off.
Week off. Then 23rd of October, we're in Austin.
I was going to say that'll be nice and cold. And I remembered it's in Austin, so it won't be. It'll be a lovely day. So yeah. Always looking forward to the Formula One race at COTA. It's a wonderful track. I do like it quite a bit. One of these days I'm going to get there. Not this month, maybe next year. So
likewise, hopefully either NASCAR, Formula One, or deep in the far end of the abyss, IndyCar, which is a 0.1% chance of happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go back to.
Unfortunately, but what will happen?
Not since they got their NASCAR date. So
yeah, but what will happen is there will be a test in Palm Springs, which coincides with a couple days before the Busch Clash in LA.
Right. Yep. They've got the new it's a club track. And I can't forget what it's called, But I took a look at the track map. It's a pretty
It's a
interesting
great
place.
facility, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat looking place. Yes, I don't know why the name of it escapes me.
I think it's like Thermal Club.
Thermal Club. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Thermal Club. Yep.
Palm
So
Springs, Florida.
yeah, so
California even.
that'll be interesting because if you recall when they first started using Barber for spring training, Barber eventually ended up on the schedule. Now is Thermal Club going to end up on the schedule? It doesn't. It
They're
doesn't.
Gonna
Yeah,
it's not going to be.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right away.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they have the infrastructure to take care of a professional event. And you can have a similar situation to what happened in New Orleans a couple of years trying to make a club track into a professional racing facility, and it just it's not going to work. But it'll be interesting to see the cars test out there. I don't know if the testing will be open to the public or not, but it'll probably be televised on Peacock, so we could at least get a look at how the cars get around there. But that'll be fun and exciting.
I'd imagine so. If it's like an open test, where usually those open tests are kind of open out there. I'm not sure how open compared to like some of the track ones, like at Portland. So I'll be curious to see what they do with Thermal Club. But if the cards are played right, it might not be a bad idea to check the facility out, considering it's like a 2.5 hour drive by LA from there to LA, and then includes traffic. And it so happens to be in the same week as the Busch Clash, so double dipping may not be a bad idea. But yeah, looking at it is an interesting facility, but we'll see how it does in terms of testing.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like there's enough different kinds of turn there and enough kind of different configurations they can make out of the track that they can get some really good data.
Yeah.
So. All right, guys. Well, you got one more thought there, Luis?
Yeah, little slight IndyCar news as well. That, of course, we talked about last week that Santino Ferrucci is going to be joining AJ Foyt for next season. Now it's all confirmed that Dalton Kellett will now be a part of the Foyt organization. So it's just looking like it might be Ferrucci and Ben Peterson in the organization at this time.
Yeah, I think Larry Foyt had made some comments that he feels like they probably operate better as a two-car operation, which for them where they're at, it's probably 2 cars is where they need to be at this point in time. I think 3 is ambitious on their budget, and we saw that it really didn't help them this past year. So now Dalton Kellett, for his part, he says he has nothing solid to announce for 2023. I mean, if he's still got the K-line money coming from Daddy, he may end up somewhere. But again, here's a guy of I hate to crack on any race car driver because they're all better than you or I. But Kellett was unremarkable in Indy Lights, honestly. He did like 4 or 5 years of Indy Lights, and he finished 7th out of 8 cars competing and 10th out of 12 cars competing, and then ends up in IndyCar, and he's had a couple of flashes of a good run here or there, but overall, his career has been unremarkable, and it just stinks of that rich kid on daddy's money just living out his dreams when he's really never going to be a top tier talent. So yeah, I mean, and again, I hate to put it that way because I got a chance to talk to Kellett, and he's a real nice fella, a real nice guy, but yeah, he's not the elite talent that when you look at how deep the field is in IndyCar, and he's just a little little too far in the deep end, if you ask me. So.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. It's like, what rides are there available in terms of, there's not a whole lot. The only big one that stands out is the 78 car, which I said before, they should probably look for a veteran driver for that one to kind of build the team around them. And on top of that, how I had Callum Ilott in his sophomore year to get even better. He had a pretty good rookie season, just reliability and other things just kind of got in the way. And I felt like maybe that's a decent spot, but who knows? But as far as Kelly, he's gotten better over time, like you mentioned. He's one of the few that I've spoken outside of like the whole bullpen and all that, and I second that as well. And also, he could bring some stuff to the table. I mean, he's got like an engineering background, and also He got a wealth of knowledge as far as the ins and out of how a car works and all of that. So I imagine he'll still be around. As far as driving, it's kind of a time will tell thing.
Yeah, and again, there's he can always take his K-Line money to IMSA as well. They're always looking for drivers in IMSA, and it seems like a lot of guys that things don't work out in IndyCar and end up over in IMSA. So, all right then. Well, that's time, guys. So I want to thank you, Richard. I want to thank you, Louise. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts and YouTube. And I want to thank you folks who listen to us week in and week out. But until next week, have a good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.